Hey, what's up, everybody? We are back with the Brewer Report. As you can see, we are no longer in our house studio. We are back on whatever software we're using. I won't mention the names. But thank you again for joining us. As always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps to push our podcast more out there, particularly in these YouTube streets, because that's how their algorithm works. Today, we are not really talking specifically about food or health food today, but we are talking about life expectancy, particularly when it comes to men in America. You can call it an urgent issue. I'll read a statistic. Just men overall have a shorter life expectancy than women. In general, that life expectancy is for men currently overall. So we're not speaking specifically about a particular race, but right now, sorry, I have to look deep into my camera because I don't have my glasses on. I need to eat more kale, I guess, Daddy. Yes, to help with my eyes. All right, so men overall right now are at 76 years. Women overall are at 81 years. So in general, women tend to live longer than men. However, there are some exceptions to that, and my father will talk more on that later in the show. There are exceptions. But I remember growing up hearing that often that women tend to live longer than men. And it was always said that it's mostly because, in our culture, men do tend to take on a lot. Culturally, we're taught that men are, for some households, the head of the household. So some people attributed them maybe living shorter lives because of maybe the stress that they're dealing with. But today we're also going to be talking about it could also be the diet that they are consuming. And that's where we are today. And also, we did have a pandemic recently, and that too may be playing a factor. And we'll talk more on that later. But let's move on. What really kind of sparked this particular topic was I have personally been seeing just people in my age group even passing away from what I would like to say preventable diseases like heart disease, cancer. Well, cancer, I don't know if it's always preventable, but for the most part, I'm assuming it can be. Obviously, there are other factors for people in my age group, but I've seen people in my age group pass away unexpectedly in their, early 40s, mid 40s, and 50s. And it's shocking to me, and I'm witnessing it. And and some of you may have also witnessed how a lot of our prominent rappers, DMX, a popular DJ, just passed away. And they were all in their late 50s and just too young to be passing away. Now, I know some rappers pass away for other reasons, some of them being homicides, and we're going to talk more on that later. But it's just interesting to me, and that's really what kinda sparked, my interest in us wanting to do this particular show. And Daddy, you wanted to talk also about how you've lost friends and things like that as well.
Yes, I've lost 8 friends in the last 3 months. Is When I was home taking care of my mother, and my band director asked me how old I was. I said I was 70 at the time, 'cause now I'm almost 79. And he said, "Boy, let me tell you something. You're in the red zone." And I didn't really understand what he was saying, although I'd obviously lost some friends prior to my 70s. But once I have gotten into my 70s, it is becoming a reality that, life expectancy for men especially is in the 70s. And I currently have a friend right now who is uh, in care for cancer. And as I said, I've already lost about um, 8 friends in the last 3 months. And I was just talking to another friend who has lost 5 family members this year, all of them male. and he's in his mid to late 70s. And so it is a reality for us. But the main cause of all of that is diet, period. That's it. Its main cause is diet. Now, there are other factors, and we'll talk about that. The main cause is diet.
Yes. And obviously, as African Americans, we recognize or we have friends, like we said, who have passed away. We feel prematurely or too soon. And right now, the statistic for African American men in particular is 72, which is to me very young. I know some people don't look at 72 as young, but I do because I've had grandparents who have lived close to 100 or over 100 years old. Like Grandma Brewer lived to 102. Her husband, my grandfather, lived to 85, and my maternal grandparents lived, my grandfather lived to 100 and my grandmother 95. So when I see 72, that's like, whoa. And obviously I have parents in that age range, so it makes me nervous. And I've even heard some of my contemporaries speak on how a lot of their parents or aunts and uncles did not make it to 70, and they look at 70 like it's just extremely old, and it's really likely because of this statistic that you see so many people, perhaps in your community, pass away at that age. So you just think you're not going to make it to that age, or it's just the norm. But what my father's trying to explain is it's not the norm. It does not need to be the norm. We need to start changing our diet. Now, for African American women, I believe it's at 78. So African American women are living on average 6 years longer than African American men. But my dad has more to say on this.
Yeah, when you look at the number one causes of death, is heart disease, cancer, diabetes, strokes, etc., with the exception of African American males. There's another factor in all of that, and that's homicides. And that's another factor in that. But poor diet and unhealthy diets are the key. So when you look back at our podcast and we talk about the G Bombs diet, what attacks that is greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. And when we look back at our parents, my parents, Stacey's grandparents, they ate wholesome foods following a lot of the G Bombs pattern. I asked my grandparents, my grandmother died in her 70s, but my grandfather died at 88. Why? Because he ate out of the garden. And a lot of his food was wholesome, organic foods. And so he lived to be 88. And then when I changed my mother's diet to the G Bombs diet, she made it to 102 because it attacks all of those things we just talked about, heart disease. That's basically saturated fat. We just went through that in our onions and garlic podcast and how your arteries they're going to harden. In other words, you're going to die from something, but it's not what you die from, is when do you die from it? Can you extend your life out? So you can extend your arterial functions out well into your 80s and 90s if you're eating garlic and onions, okay? You can extend your life significantly. I've got some friends right now with diverticulitis. One of them almost died. That's the intestinal issue. He was bleeding in his intestines. Guess what solves that? Go back to our beans podcast, and you'll find that beans, which are the highest fiber foods, will solve that intestinal issue. Okay. So, strokes and cardiovascular disease, and we talked about that, is the greens and the beans, and especially natto beans, which clean out your arteries, keep your arteries cleaned. And so, yes, you're going to eventually pass on, but you can live a full life well into your 80s and 90s if you move towards this type of diet.
Yes, and become more active, and also take away the best you can some of the stresses in your life. Maybe incorporate some more meditation, have a stronger spiritual base. I know the Black church was very big in the Black community, but it's not as big, according to reports. But we may need to bring that back, more community. And we have to be honest, when it comes to African Americans and our diets, a lot of African American communities can be in low income areas. There can be high pollution in those areas. Apparently, African Americans tend to suffer from asthma a great deal. So some of this is caused, if you will, by structural racism or systemic racism. I just heard a doctor speak on that. So it's not because you're African American, you're having these health issues. A lot of it is just the environment and why the environment is that way. Why, those environments can have food deserts where you may not have access to the natto beans. You may not have access to the fresh smoothie shops and things like that. So we need to encourage also more businesses to open in African American communities that can offer these type of fresh foods and not just fried chicken or liquor stores. I mean, that's just the truth of it. We need to have better access, excuse me, in our communities. And we are here to offer the education and hopefully spark the mind to bring more of that to African American communities. But is there any more you want to share on this?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the food desert because one of the in my community here in Orlando, in my mother's community here in Orlando, one of the things that this community insisted on was to put a grocery store of fresh fruit, and it turned out to be a Walmart grocery store in this community because when you looked around, they had to drive miles to the nearest
Yes.
grocery store. And
And I
so
remember
now
that as a kid.
we can go to, the Walmart and get fresh fruits and vegetables, including organic fruits and vegetables.
Right. And I remember that in
That's
real
like
time. Yeah, I'm sorry. I remember that in real time. That happened around the late '90s. I remember when actually Reverend Dennis brought a grocery store to the community.
our path.
Right, because
We
otherwise I would
recognized that
right,
community didn't have it.
right. Because I remember I had to travel with granddaddy to Publix, like you said, miles away, but I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. So there are some structural issues here. And so, the bottom line is that, now let's talk a minute about COVID because COVID dropped the life expectancy significantly. Um,
Mhm.
and one of the reasons that COVID did that, when you look at the causes of death, ironically, Hispanic males during COVID was one of the leading causes of death over heart disease.
Wow.
How about that? Amazing. And so it was like the third leading cause among African Americans. Why? Because once you caught COVID, if you had underlying conditions, you were not able to survive it. Okay.
Oh, that's
We talk
true.
about this in our flu and our flu podcast. What can you do? Because we haven't had the flu or a cold in years because of the green tea and hibiscus tea, the manuka honey, which you can buy online, by the way, and the black seed oil. Okay, so we talked about that. So we haven't had to, when we did pop positive for COVID, we immediately went to that regimen, and we were fine. But there were two people in my community who didn't survive.
Mhm.
So COVID was a major factor in terms of life expectancy, especially among black and brown people.
Right, and there was misinformation and maybe even a lack of access to, maybe getting COVID shots. It's a lot of different factors there, I'm sure. But you want to talk also about just in general, well, specifically about Asian men. We know white men, let's give that statistic though before we get to the Asian men. White men also live
So there's one
go ahead.
exception. Now, most like we said, most men and most women outlive their respective men in their racial category. White women outlive white men, black women outlive black men, blah. But there is an exception where Asian American men outlive black women and white women, with one exception, and that's Hispanic women. They don't outlive Hispanic women. Why? We talked about that in our bean segment, the Hispanic paradox.
Yes.
Hispanics eat 3 times more beans than we do.
Yes. So eat those beans, like we said in that podcast. But real quick, the statistic is that white men are living on average 76 years, so still again more than black men. And white women are at 81, correct? And sorry guys, I have to read this. And to your point about Asian men are at 84, and Asian women are just doing it. This is the top of everybody's. They are at 88. And we mentioned the Hispanic, Asian men are out they aren't outliving Hispanic women, right? But Hispanic men are at 80.
Women about 85.
Right, Hispanic men are at 80, which is still high, and yes, Hispanic women are at 85, as my dad said. And one last one, uh, well, I guess that's it, yeah. Should I well, what I mention Native Americans. I can right, well, Native Americans, yeah, yeah. Native Americans, the men are at, 72. Okay, so they're lower than black men, and, the women are at 78. But yes,
So the bottom line is this: if you're on a G-Bombs diet, you're gonna live longer, period, okay? Even with COVID, even with a pandemic, you can survive that if you are on a G-Bombs diet. And in our particular case, because we also did some research, Manuka honey and black seed oil. But the bottom line is if you're eating your greens, beans, and we cannot overemphasize G-Bombs plus nuts, okay? It's plus nuts. So we eat that every day, and when you look at our kale salad, my wife's kale salad, Deanie's kale salad, what's in there? It's the G-Bombs diet,
and
okay?
you
And
can
we
see
just
that
add
now on
some
YouTube.
extra.
Yeah, and you can see that now on YouTube, that recipe.
Yeah.
I'll
Make sure you look at the
below.
kale salad.
Yeah, I'll link it below.
Right, look at the kale salad video. If you eat that every day, if you eat that at least 2 or 3 times a day, you're gonna be healthy, period.
Well, wait, we're not gonna eat the kale salad 2 or 3, you mean 2 or 3 times a week?
Yeah, 2, I'm sorry, 2 or 3 times a week and not every day, I'm sorry. That's funny.
Right,
But
right.
right now, I have a big bowl in my refrigerator, and I will eat on that for the next 2 or 3 days.
Yes. In fact, we need to do a video on how to do some food prepping. Because I think that will help people to make better choices. Because a lot of times people make poor food choices because you just want something quick. You want you want easy access to something. I know that was my issue when I was overweight. I would just eat out because I didn't feel like cooking. But preparation is also key.
Absolutely, and so when you make that big bowl, as you will see in our Deanie's Kale Salad, podcast and video, we make a big bowl. And that means that, we can hold on to that salad at least 2 to 3 days and eat on it. And if you're a meat eater, lead with that kale salad.
Lead with the kale salad. Right.
Right, I had a friend who unfortunately has passed on. I offered him beans or a steak. He said, "Oh, hell no, Imma eat the steak." He's no longer with us because he ended up dying from cardiovascular disease. Yeah, I had another friend, very, uh, wealthy man at that, who basically said when they say, "Well, you gotta give up your fried chicken and all that stuff," he says, "I can't do it." And unfortunately, he passed at 72.
And those are the choices. And we have to also mention that just the American diet in general is a problem. There's ultra processed foods that definitely my generation grew up on. I think more so than my father's generation, the boomers. The boomers, I don't know if you had as much fast food as my generation did. And then we had delivery. When we would go to school, you would have your chips and your sugary drinks. And I really truly think that's a lot of why a lot of folks in my generation I'm witnessing pass away from colon cancer, even. at fairly young ages. I just saw a report of a law firm accepting folks like maybe a class action suit um, because there are children today getting diabetes and they're under 21 and they're blaming these food companies that are feeding, ultra processed foods. So that's really a big issue just culturally, when you say just for our country that we really need to work on.
Well, that's what your grandfather did when he took over the food service at our high school back in the early 50s. He refused to serve sodas or fast foods. He would only serve a meat, a starch, a vegetable, water, orange juice, and milk. And so that generation did not manifest the same uh, sugary diabetes type uh, problems that the young and obesity. I mean, I rode by the
Obesity,
high
yes.
school the other day, and my God, I mean, the young people are so obese now. Why? Because they're
Right.
eating these fast foods, and so and ironically, even our Asian American brothers and sisters, their children are now defaulting to more fast food. So I'm not sure that the Asian American life expectancy is going to continue to be as high because of that, because we have already seen in Okinawa, Japan, where the young people are now eating more fast foods, and the longest living women are from Okinawa, Japan at 93. Their life expectancy is going down.
Exactly.
So, it's that's a choice. You either eat fast foods and quick foods or you eat the G-Mom's diet, period, plus
Now
nothing.
see now see, I know you're good with a phrase, fast food you used to say, "Fast cash won't last." Fast food, fast death, I don't know, like, that doesn't rhyme, but
We gotta come
that's
up with a phrase about fast foods.
right, because that's because to your point about the high school you're referring to, there's a McDonald's or there used to be a McDonald's right next door.
Still there.
So, it is what it is. I remember when I was in
I
high
mean, the
school,
kids walk
we would
right
get
out of
that
school
too.
to the McDonald's.
Exactly. And look, we're not here to dog McDonald's as a corporation. People make their choices. I mean, there's room for you to have, I guess you would call it a treat or a free day. But our issue, is just forget about, I don't want to mention brands here. In other words, it's not about the brand. It's just in general how people are eating out more and eating less wholesome foods, and that's just something we need to work on.
Absolutely. As I said, my as soon as we finish this podcast, I'm gonna go in there and have me a big bowl of kale salad. So watch that particular podcast in the kitchen, Brewers in the Kitchen.
Right. And then one last point I want to make is, again, we're not a social podcast. We're focused on health. But maybe also what's contributing to some of this gap when it comes to men versus women in terms of life expectancy. There are reports that more and more men aren't getting a higher education, whether that's even just finishing college, I mean, finishing high school or getting their trade certificates or going to college. And we all know that if you have a better education, you tend to get a better job, and with a better job, you may get better health care. So that too may be playing a role. And we mentioned the G bombs diet, but Dr. Greger, like I said before, or have said before, he has a daily dozen, and he incorporates in his daily dozen, which is very similar to the G-Bombs diet, having your greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, beans, and berries and seeds. He includes matcha green teas and hibiscus teas, but he also includes, I said this at the top, you have to be active. Like my father mentioned, my grandparents, they were active. They didn't necessarily go to the gym, but they were active in their communities. They would do yard work, whatever it was, they were active. They weren't sedentary. They weren't sitting down all day. You have to be active because Gregor says on his daily dozen, you need to work out at least if it's high intense workout, at least 60 minutes up, maybe 6 days a week, and 90 minutes if you're just kind of doing moderate exercise. So you need to be active. You need to move that body and get your circulation going.
Absolutely. And I work out at 24-hour fitness, a little plug for them. I lift weights, and of course, I do some aerobics. But the bottom line is that you have to stay active. Your grandmother worked full time until she was 83, and you could tell the difference between her and my father because my father retired at your grandfather retired at 69, but they stayed active. And on on your maternal grandparents' side, they were very active well into their 90s. And
Right.
so you got to stay active. So people say, when are you going to retire? I said, never, because your mind is a factor as well. You got to stay active.
Right. Because I mean, I look at some of your, I love the artists of your era. Like I grew up during that era, but I see a lot of them still touring, well into their
Diana,
80s. Diana Ross, I mean, she looks just as good as
Patti
she did
LaBelle.
20 years. Patti LaBelle's about to do a big tour with Shaka Khan and all. So they're staying active. Otis Williams of the Temps, active. Yeah, and Barry Gordy, he stayed active.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
producing a play at 85.
And your grandmother, on your, my mother, your grandmother was flying to Paris, France in 94. So,
Exactly.
hey,
So we're sharing all
yeah,
these
you can
guys.
live a
Yeah,
full life.
there we go. And that's why we're sharing this. You can live a full life well into your 80s and your 90s. I'll even push it to because look, as healthcare, even though life expectancy is going down, as we mentioned the reasons why, there's various reasons, mostly diet. Yes, COVID has played a role, but really with healthcare becoming more sophisticated and us having better medicines and vitamins and more access to gyms, etc., we really should majority of us be living into our late 80s, if not 90s to 100s. Like there's some people who believe in time we may be able to live to 120 pretty comfortably. So if you think about that, like if you're 70 years old right now, you can live to 120, you're living another 50 years. So don't just stop your life because you're in your 60s or in your 70s or even in your 50s. There's a whole lot more life to live as my dad I'm going to be posting a video of my father speaking on this, but, there's a whole what did you say, a runway? Uh,
Mhm.
yeah. So keep active, keep and eat well and think well too, be spiritual.
I agree.
Well, we have exhausted this particular topic, but we both felt that this was very important to share because, again, my father's witnessing some of his friends pass away, and I'm witnessing friends pass away. And it's just time that we be informed and put this to action.
Definitely. You got to eat your veggies. Yeah, like I said, you can eat your meat, but lead with your veggies.
And diet is actually more important than working out, by the way. Some people don't realize that. People think, oh, I can eat this burger and then go run 5 miles. No,
No, that saturated fat is gonna lodge in your arteries.
right.
You can't run your way to health. Mhm.
But running is important because it does strengthen your heart and allows your heart to maybe not beat as fast. So exercise is important, but diet, according to experts, is like
Exercise is
80%.
20 to 30% of it. So 80 to 70 to 80% is going to be your diet.
Yes. So there you have it, guys. Thank you so much again for checking us out this week. Again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you again next week. Peace.